Welcome to a Celtic State of Mind. I'm Paul John Dykes, and today I'm delighted to be joined by JP Mason and Declan McConville. First of all, Declan, welcome back to the ACSOM Bulletin. It's a pleasure to see you both.
Good afternoon, Paul.
Now, this is the first time the three of us have even spoken. This is the first time us three have ever spoken since Celtic have lost a title. I remember waking up on Monday to come into my work and thinking, this is the first time I've gone to my work in a decade not being the champions. And it's the first time us three have ever even spoken while Celtic are not the champions. Declan, I think some people look at you and say, well, you're of a younger generation. What age are you now, 20?
21.
21. You don't know what it's like not to have a successful Celtic side. How are you managing the fact that we're not the champions at the moment?
In a way, I kind of feel a wee bit lucky that when my dad started first taking me to the games, Rangers had a wee spell of success and they won 3-0 under Walter Smith. So there was days at Celtic Park when I watched Celtic be beaten at Rangers. I've been at Ibrox and watched the Rangers win games against Celtic, and I've watched Celtic not win the league. I was mascot in the day when Hearts beat us in a semi-final in the Scottish Cup. So I've tasted the lows of Celtic. But to put it into context for me, the last time Rangers won the league, I was in primary 6. I went through the whole of my high school years watching Celtic win the league every single year. The last 2 years of high school, Celtic won 2 trebles. The first 2 years of university, Celtic won 2 trebles. And, half a university, Celtic have won the league. So a full high school and half a uni's not too bad, is it?
Now, JP, can you imagine school days like that? Because I can't.
I can't either. I'll contrast that, Declan, with primary 5 onwards, Rangers won the league. So primary 5 and the whole of high school, Rangers won the league. My first taste was obviously stopping the 10 in 98. And those scars, by the way, that were inflicted in the 90s, they're still there. And that's what sort of gets me by this week, knowing that despite all the hullabaloo and everything else and the horrendous celebrations, that those scars will run deep at the other side of the city as well, and that gets me to sleep at night.
They will run deep because that level of domination, we keep hearing it, unprecedented. We're never going to see it again. I'm not so sure. I'm not so sure when it comes to Celtic and Scottish football. I think that this was the monumental unravelling of the perfect storm. I think that there had been errors made for a number of seasons that all finally came home to roost. I don't think Celtic are going to allow this to happen again. And I'm not being bullish because everything that's happened in the last few weeks, but we had a wee chat before we came online, and I said it's incredible how galvanising an effect has when people start targeting Celtic from outside of the club, and you see Rangers, there's no point calling them anything else, you see Rangers running riot. And I don't mean in terms of on the sporting side of things, running riot, running through the streets of Glasgow, creating carnage. I think we all knew that was going to happen. And then Celtic being dragged into that, on a political level, being dragged into that. We said yesterday, don't drag Celtic into this. Don't hark back to something that happened outside the ground after the Ross County win and say that this is part of any reason that you might have to postpone a Glasgow Derby in a couple of weeks' time. I feel really strong about that because I just think, we've been ultra critical of Celtic this season. And I think justifiably so. You're nodding your head there, Dec. I think justifiably so this season. And I think it oftentimes takes the fans to highlight or shine a light on the deficiencies. So, I've got absolutely no regrets on the tack that was taken throughout the season. But then you look at the way that Rangers are being treated, by the authorities, by government. And you think, well, is this getting to that stage where it's no longer an equal and fair kind of level in terms of where Celtic are and the standards that we're held by against Rangers? Are we getting back to that situation, Declan? Is it something that we really need to, as a club and as a fan base, stand up to and nip in the bud?
I hope we're not going back to that kind of situation. The other night, I think there was a bit of a split in the Celtic support in terms of the tweet that went out, because some people were saying it's too late for that. You've left it until the league's done to be calling anything out. There's been previous situations, I think, this season when Celtic has been held to too high a standard. and maybe the same punishment didn't come for the other club on the other side of the city. But a lot of people, I think, are at the camp that it was too late to start calling things out. But I think, as you say, Paul, initially we're the guys that pay season tickets. We're the guy that goes and watch our teams. It's all right for us to criticise it, because inevitably we're the people that need to go through the pain and the suffering. But I'm not having a guy from TalkSport or wherever Mr. Durham is just now call it out, because his opinion in Celtic means absolutely nothing to me. So
No, you're
I
right.
don't really care what he's got to say.
No, you're right. And I wasn't even going to name him, Declan, because I just think he's a shock jock. We could all do that. We could all do that. We could all use the clickbait mentality on the headline of every single podcast to drag in more discussion or vehement kind of opinions, JP. And we try to be as balanced as possible. And I'm sitting here thinking, very much like Charlie Nicholas, I'm sitting here thinking, we've had a couple of changes that we were calling for. And I would say that obviously the decision for Peter Lawlor to retire JP at the end of the season, being replaced by Dominic Mackay, was something that, as a fan base, I think, I'm not going to ever say universally, because you don't speak for the entire fan base, but I think from the feedback we were getting, a lot of Celtic fans wanted that to happen. A lot of Celtic fans wanted Neil Lennon to be removed from office a lot sooner than he was. And Celtic fans were also, especially, platforms like a Celtic State of Mind, very critical of the engagement between fan base and club. And I think in the last couple of weeks we've seen certainly some positives there, because we were invited to a conference, something that we've never been invited to in the 3.5 to 4 years that ACSOM has existed. So I've got to look at that as a positive. I can't come on and still criticise the club in that respect, because I think that these are the positive moves that we were asking for, but they're not beyond criticism. And I think, it's interesting, Declan, that you say the tweet came out, and I think JP said in his Twitter page, I knew I'd get that password eventually. I don't know if you're going to share it with us, JP. But for me, the world of Twitter can be used in that way. It can be used with a tongue-in-cheek aspect of it. Now, some people try and, skim around the kind of edges of the subject of Rangers, new club, old club. Some people go on about, let's not call them Rangers, let's call them Sevco. And, get really hung up on that. And then, of course, the terminology of the Glasgow Derby and the use of such terminology, and the fact that Celtic co-own the trademark of the term Old Firm and the Old Firm, and have done since back in a time, JP, where Celtic as a club and Rangers were both looking as a business alliance towards moving out of the Scottish game and moving into England. And it was at that time that they trademarked that term, the Old Firm. Now, I don't think there's no argument around the new club, old club debate, and it's not something we're going to have today. There is no argument. And, if they want to print 55 on merchandise and all the rest of it, more fool them, because we're looking at a situation where we don't even know the losses in the accounts. But if you accumulate 2012 to date, you're probably looking at 100 million quid. So, I know that Celtic are going into next season a lot stronger than that. So, in that respect, JP, I try and, kill the noise and concentrate on what Celtic are doing to put this right. Because, as I say, it's unravelled spectacularly. And, the defeat, the fact that we've lost the league, of course it hurts. Does it galvanise you that you've been through it before, do you think, JP?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, as much as I didn't enjoy last weekend, of course I didn't. I've said it a few times on the show that there's bigger things going on in the world right now that if I was to get all downbeat and really upset and angry about this, then I would have to question my own moral fibre. But with regards to us, the Twitter post specifically, I don't think that it was too little too late. I think it was a direct response to the way that football fans in Glasgow are being portrayed, and that made news all over the place. Those scenes, one, breaking a lockdown, two, destroying property, and whether or not they've raised money for it to repair it or not. I mean, that to me doesn't suddenly make everything better. It's a bizarre sort of retort to go, we paid for it, and it's like, what sort of, and then also claiming to have cleaned it up as well. It's just that for me again is just, well, it's been refuted by Glasgow City Council, which again makes you wonder if it actually happened. Of course it didn't. But with regards to dragging us into it. The one thing I would say about that is, with regards to the trademark as well, I believe that, if something has been trademarked in the past, then just because one part of it has relinquished its contribution to that title, then it still remains a trademark. So if you're going to renew it, then it's renewed for past, info, past media, past DVDs, all the rest of it. So I don't think it makes it suddenly go, oh well, actually we're admitting that we are part of this current old firm. But one thing also I want to say is, I saw a statement, and I can't remember who it was from, that said that people were planning to, or encouraging people to go to Celtic Park on the 21st if it should go ahead. The title of this show obviously indicates there's a doubt. I can't express. Do not go. Just do not go. Stay at home. Do not go. It is an absolute recipe for disaster, and it will just, as an article on the Celtic blog said the other day, I think it was James Forrest, not that James Forrest, said in the Celtic blog, do not follow them into the gutter, and that's the take home from that article.
The big thing again is, even a very small minority, JP, can do a lot of damage for the reputation of the club and the fan base. On the terminology of old firm, I think there was a very good point, so I'm sorry for not crediting whoever made the point the other day on one of our streams, saying that whilst we have trademark of it, whilst we have ownership of it, you can basically make sure it doesn't get used. And that's what the club want. We don't want to use it. Go back to 2013 when the club published my book, and all references to the old firm were removed and replaced by the Glasgow Derby. So the editorial even back then was quite clear that we're not using that. We stand alone. One club since 1888, it's pretty clear. So personally, Declan says it, a divided opinion. I was on the side of opinion where I thought, good on you. Good on you for tweeting that out. More tweets like that. I don't know who was responsible for it.
It looked like a hack. It really did look like a hack. There's no way nobody looked at that and didn't check the source to see that it wasn't a fake Celtic Twitter account. Everything did.
Absolutely. And this, somebody also said, and you pick up a lot of great humour, don't you, and self-deprecating humour amongst the Celtic fan base, whereby somebody says, it really just shows you, the depths that we've kind of fallen to when the highlight of our season is a tweet, from the club. But hey, it was good while it lasted. But as I say, whoever's got control of that Twitter account, keep them coming. I think they were criticised, Declan, going back to your previous point. The club were criticised for saying, too little, too late. You could have been standing up for various other things that are close to the fans' hearts, many fans' hearts, when you're talking about, the Resolution 12 guys and that campaign, and the fact that, it was more or less just booted down the road every single time it was brought up at an AGM, to the point where it's no longer going to be considered. So I do get both sides of that. But I do think that a completely different approach is being adopted by the club in, advance of the new CEO coming in, and long may that side of things continue, because I felt that it was very positive to speak to John Kennedy and David Turnbull from a Celtic State of Mind's perspective and pose some questions. And you just imagine if we were able to do that throughout the season, the types of questions that we could have posed to the management team. I don't know if the timing of that had anything to do with Neil Lennon's departure. I also don't know if Neil Lennon would have been up for it. But I'm pretty sure there would have been quite tasty press conferences, JP, throughout this season. However, on the subject of Lenny, I'm allowed to call him Lenny, I think, although he's not my pal anymore, apparently. He is now 5-1 to take over at Aberdeen. Did that surprise you, Dec? Is that just the usual kind of like throw the names into a hat, any old name is going to be linked to just about every manager's job?
It did surprise me a bit, Paul. I thought maybe at this point in time we'd maybe take a bit of time out the game. I don't know if that job would maybe appeal to him again. It's a bit similar to the situation at Hibs. It's a big club, Aberdeen, that they've not really hit the heights that they have done so in the past. Derek McInnes up there, he brought home a League Cup, the first trophy in God knows how long. Good couple of second place finishes, but I think it had ran its time. Whether Neil Lennon gets a job at Pittodrie, I don't think he will. I imagine he'll maybe go for, I think there's a guy Glass at getting the bookies' favourite that's at Atalanta United, and there's a link there between the ownership at Pittodrie. But I think it's just a case of throwing a name into the ring that's quite well known and obviously high profile. That's just recently lost their job.
Yeah, and I think Natasha mentioned that the other day, Declan, in relation to Enzo Maresca. His name, he was one of the favourites for the Aberdeen job. You say there as well, they're a big club. And yeah, they are. I mean, I often think about this, looking at the league table just now. At the beginning of the season, I did say I thought that Hibs would finish second. Do you remember that? I mean, everything you say is recorded, so people can go back and criticise me for saying it. I did say that. I didn't quite think they were going to be chasing us for second spot, to be fair. But they're going to be finishing third for the first time since 2005. So the last time that Hibs finished third in the table, JP, was under Tony Mowbray, where he had that clutch of talent, which actually included Scott Brown, as it happens. So you're looking at the other clubs, Hibs and Dundee United. I grew up with Dundee United being one of those clubs, JP, that you would think were one of the big clubs in Scotland. Aberdeen, and I think you've got to throw in Hearts as well. I think Hearts, with the fan base that they have, I know they're obviously in the Championship this season, but these are the clutch of big Scottish clubs. What I would like to ask you, JP, is Declan says Aberdeen are a big club. When you look at the situation, the financial situation at Celtic, there was a point during the season there where the Aberdeen owners admitted that they were burning something like £1 million a month. So for any incoming I thought it was a bold move. With regards to McInnes, I thought it was a bold move because there's a club there who doesn't have the same kind of financial clout as Celtic. Going into next season, potentially with a brand new setup coming in, who want a managerial team who want to assess the squad, bring in new names, etc. And it might be particularly difficult for Aberdeen under the current financial climate. I mean, I thought it was a really bold move and one they might actually rue. Actually, they might come to regret that.
Well, it's like a scaled down version of what's the position Celtic are in, isn't it? They've released a guy that's been a big part of their world lives for the last 8 years. He was there.
Yeah.
I saw the video that Aberdeen posted where it was like, thanks for the memories, Derek, and seeing him when he started and seeing what he looks like then made me feel really, really old, because I was just like, wow, that he still looks like he was a player when he started as a manager of Aberdeen. But with regards to their finances, yeah, I'd be really concerned if I was an Aberdeen fan about that, a potential rebuild there as well, because they've got some players on loan, I think, as well. Like Canberry's only on loan, and Hornby, and maybe a couple of others as well. So they've got that sort of start from scratch. And yeah, if a manager comes in, he's going to want money to spend. And if they've been burning that sort of money a month, where's that money going to come from? Do you know? I think a lot of clubs are going to really need to cut their cloth this summer. And if we're not back in stadiums by August, then even more so.
When we're looking at Aberdeen and the players that you mentioned there, JP, I remember, if I'm going to give myself a dig for saying that Hibs were going to finish second, I'm going to have to take credit for saying that Hibs certainly came out of the transfer market, the transfer window rather, stronger than Aberdeen, because people disagreed with me when I said that back in January. But I did feel that even though, the Canberry, I think Canberry's a useful player, JP, but quite ineffective on a consistent level, if you know what I mean. You know that he's capable, but not always does he turn up. And I think that's been proven since January. I mean, the run that Aberdeen have been on has been really poor, whereas Hibs, even though they've had a couple of poor results of recent times, I just think that with the managerial team they've got, they're solid. They're pretty solid. But again, I'll go back to what I said last week. There may well be this Scottish football managerial merry-go-round prompted by, that change at Aberdeen. Or they might even go for someone like Owen Coyle, who has been in the news over the last day or so, talking about the fact, confirming everything that we already knew in relation to the fact that Neil Lennon didn't choose his coaching staff. I mean, in terms of the managerial situation, Declan, we're in a scenario now where obviously John Kennedy's taken over. He was part of the problem. I think we've said that all season because he was there and, he was influential. He was behind the scenes. But he's taken the reins and, I'm pretty sure that he'll be in charge for the rest of the campaign. Does it worry you when someone like Scott Allen comes out and says, the players will be back in Kennedy for the post permanently?
I think that's just a kind of natural thing to come. A lot of the guys in there, your Scott Browns and James Forrest, have obviously worked with John for a long time. there under Ronnie Dyla, through Brendan, through Neil, and now in the position he's sell. But I think if you go back to that initial situation, to put John Kennedy beside Neil Lennon, to me was always going to be a storm for disaster. You could see that there was no relationship there, really. Yes, it worked for a campaign to win 9 in a row, but I think there was always going to be an issue there. It was two guys that I don't think worked too close to each other, which is obviously apparent that when one person goes, the other one's still there. I don't doubt that John Kennedy's probably a good coach on his own. He's not made it yet as a manager. I know obviously that was something that we tried with Neil Lennon first time around, and it did eventually work. If you look at Juventus the other night, again, paying dividends to a club legend in Pirlo, and it's not worked out as of yet for Juve. So, this loyalty that we've got maybe is something that we really need to look at and think to ourselves, is this always the best option? Should we not be appointing the best candidate, never mind the guy that's already internally in the building? Because as you say, Paul, John Kennedy was out in that training park at Lennoxtown daily with Neil Lennon, watching the players, watching the training methods, watching what they were being put through. He is part of the problem. So if a new manager's coming in, a new setup's coming in, if Celtic want to offer that manager John Kennedy and the manager wants to take that on, by all means. But the situation we were in with Neil Lennon, where it was apparent that John was put with Neil, should not be the case going forward. It's not a good idea. It's always going to bring problems. It's been, we've heard that they both disagreed with each other in different things. It's a recipe for disaster, and that disaster has inevitably been this season.
Yeah, I can see the point, Declan. I can see the point of having a face who can assess the squad, can assist you in that respect. And I'm not comparing John Kennedy to some of the Celts who have remained in the past, but I do recall that Kenny Dalglish brought Tommy Burns back to the club when Dalglish was in charge. And obviously that was pivotal. Martin O'Neill spoke about Tommy Burns and said it was pivotal to being able to have that kind of transition from, here I'm inheriting a squad of players that I know little about, but Tommy Burns was able to fill them in, not just about the ability but also the personality of each of the individuals. They can identify any of the kind of bad eggs that were there, and I think that perhaps that's what happened following the Ronnie Dyla era. And again, having spoken positively about John Kennedy after his press conference, JP, I wasn't talking positively in terms of his coaching. I was saying, the fact that he took time to actually engage with the fans. So on the one hand, I'm criticising the club for not engaging with us. Then the guy takes an hour out his day to engage with a Celtic State of Mind and others. So I can't criticise that. But that doesn't make him a great manager. It doesn't make him a great coach. But as Deck says, I do always like that that transitional period at Celtic whereby we have a kind of boot room mentality. But I've seen a lot of comments recently saying it's a jobs for the boys mentality rather than, that boot room, that succession planning.
Well, that's what I was just going to say. I think you asked Natasha and Lawrence if they could have a question that they would pose to Peter Lawlor if there was to be a similar fan style or sort of podcast led press conference. What would you ask Peter Lawlor? And I would ask Peter Lawlor, why is it that certain coaches are kept on the books and then paired up with incoming managers? Why do you not give full autonomy to managers coming in, or you do with some and you don't with others? What's the difference? Because I'd really like to know what you would say to that, because it would be interesting. And with regards to that, the fan conference, the social media conference that Kennedy and Turnbull did, that can't just be a once in a blue moon thing. It's got to be a regular thing now. I was a bit sort of the Black Lives Matter taking the knee thing. I was just like, are they not sort of diluting this now by continuing to do it? And then I was like, wait a minute, no, they're not. By continuing to do it, it's hammering home, racism has got no part to play in football. Mm-hmm. And that's what it is. And I totally see why they're continuing to do it. So not that I'm comparing the two scenarios, but you can't only do something once and then it just disappears. You've got to keep doing it for consistency and to gain results.
Yeah, reinforce that and continue to build that relationship. And the big thing is, obviously, what is key Declan, and you'll learn this in your journalistic career because you're at the kind of early stages of that at the moment. What is key is to strike that balance. So you want to be as honest and open as possible in your views, but you also want to have a level of access which allows you to pose some of these questions that through platforms like this Celtic fans are asking. I mean, I'll go through these comments today, and some of the queries that are raised shapes your thinking, so then you can go to John Kennedy or whoever's in charge and actually pose that question. And I think the balance that you need to have is you don't turn into a sycophant in terms of you then become basically a tool for the club, so it's almost a tick box exercise. But from what I'm hearing so far, that's not the intention. There has to be guidelines. There has to obviously be a limit to how far you can push certain subjects, and I totally understand that. But they don't want us to spread a specific message. It's not as though we are now on that memo mailing list that put this out. This is a good news. This is it. That doesn't happen. So I think that it will be key in the future, but it'll also give people like yourself and people like Amy Canavan, who is another important contributor to A Celtic State of Mind, I think, experience that you can take forward in your journalistic career, your media career.
No, 100% agree with you, Paul. I think Celtic Fan Media has proven in the past year, we've been in a pandemic, that there's a lot of good outlets out there, including ourselves. There's a lot of vibrant younger people like myself and Amy in this channel. That it's a great opportunity to go and do that. I've been fortunate through yourself, Jim McCalliog, through his stuff, to be at press releases and talk to former players. And it's always a great opportunity. It's good for the CV. And it's the club helping out fans that are maybe looking at that direction of employment, so it's a lot more than that. And as you say, it's not, we hope it's not going to be, it's not the case of, go and spread the good news of the gospel, guys. Go in there, challenge them. If it's good questions or frank questions, ask them. We don't want propaganda. We want real fans' views getting out there and then being able to put them out on their platforms. I think that's a positive thing. Scottish newspapers don't print as many newspapers as they once did. They're not as big nowadays. Media is changing and has changed. More people get their news through their phone now, from apart out with newspapers. So it's time to take that step forward, and I think including fans in that step forward is the right thing to do.
No, you're right. Now, as I said before, loads of comments come through on a daily basis on ACSOM, and I'm always keen to get through as many of them as we possibly can. JP, I'll come back to your AC Milan tracksuit top in a few moments. OB Boy, you're commenting on YouTube. Just a reminder, if you are viewing ACSOM on YouTube, get subscribing to the page. We're growing it at quite an alarming rate. And that is one of the reasons, actually, why I am on the bulletin twice a week rather than 5 times a week. Also, I want to give you a rest from my dulcet tones, but it's allowing me to develop some of the other content. For example, Declan, we've spoken about Amy. Amy's got her own show where she interviews people from the world of football, and it's gone down a storm so far, and long may that continue. So get subscribing to the YouTube channel if you're not doing so already. OB Boy, it would be a disgrace, he says, if the derby is cancelled. And Malone Kenny once says absolute pollution. I'm not sure if you're talking about our output today, or you could maybe clarify that, Malone Kenny. And OB Boy goes on to say the cops have to do their job. Stephen T, where is this talk coming from? There's no way they'll postpone it. Just need to block off streets around Celtic Park the way they have done recently. The question was asked online, JP, from one of the Police Federation guys, and I thought it was a bit pompous, to be honest.
Really?
Where he was like, how would you do it? How would you police it? Yeah.
I can't believe that was a real thing. Again,
I know.
Just like I had to check the Celtic Twitter, I had to check to see that wasn't a fake account, because I thought there's no way someone in a position of authority has done this. That's absolute, high school stuff. You know what I mean? Absolute. It
is. And it's pretty obvious how you police these things or manage any situation like that. You do it in a proactive way, so it's intelligence led. So they, like going back to what OB Boy says, if the cops do their job and they tap into the intelligence streams that they work on day in, day out, they can know what the plans are in advance of the thing materialising. Now, with regards to that, the Scottish police have a full intelligence department. You know, and each of the forces used to have an individual intelligence department for football. There was football intelligence officers. We all know about Focus and how that developed with Police Scotland. So these people apparently should know who the risk fans are, Declan. I don't think you appear in any of the intelligence documents yet, Dec, but who the risk fans are, who the risk groups are. And then they use their intelligence methods and procedures to try and find out what's going to happen. And that's not just restricted to football, that's restricted to any kind of disorder, you know, be that a festival. When Tina Park used to exist, it was all intelligence led, wasn't it? So I thought it was really crass. I thought it was totally unprofessional, and it's pretty obvious what the answer is. It's proactive and it's intelligence led.
Yeah, and planning as well, Paul. I think if you look at what happened on Saturday, especially, you know, the front facade of Ibrox is quite an easy area to block off at each corner of Edmondson Drive. It's not hard to put up big shields or put vans across the road. I mean, that they're quick enough to do it whenever we used to be in the Broomlin and police it, you know, with bodies on the ground. Whereas on Saturday, it was just as if it was a free-for-all. And then again on Sunday, the biggest square in Glasgow, right in the middle of town, where are fans going to go? I wonder. You know, just it's a case of planning, thinking where can people go. So again, going back to the game in the 21st, not that I'm going to compare a Glasgow Derby to a American inauguration ceremony, but what the Washington cops did was just completely the whole area around Capitol Hill, block it off, which is easy enough for Police Scotland to do. Block off within whatever it is radius of Celtic Park. Don't let anyone near the ground, and the game can proceed. I don't see any problem in doing that.
Mm-hmm. And obviously they can implement temporary regulations in certain areas to ensure that they can approach people, search people, all that kind of stuff. And, you know, under normal circumstances, I'd be dead against that, you know, because I just think that football fans are criminalised anyway. But if you want to put a stop to it on that particular game to make sure the game goes ahead, just police it properly. You know, it's simple as that. Just police the thing properly. Before we move on, because I'm not finished with the derby just yet, JP, that tracksuit top was brought up the other week. What's the story behind that? And that's a genuine star above the European Cup, isn't it?
It is actually. Funny that real stars exist above the European Cups, but onto other things. But yeah, Milan, it was because Russell was Russell took quite a sultry selfie of himself wearing an Adidas tracksuit top, and then I said, I'll need to dig mine out. So yeah, Milan. People slag me on this probably for saying that I don't support Milan. I'm not a Milan aficionado. I just like AC Milan. I liked them when I was a wee boy, and I watched Gazzetta Football Italia, Van Basten, Rijkaard, Jean-Pierre Papin. Mm-hmm. You know, unbelievable team. And I eventually got to go and see them first time in 2000. I saw them beat Udinese at home. I was living in Nice, and I went along the road with some German guys to watch the game. And true story, I just remembered this earlier on. As I was going up the steps to go into the stand, we were in the stand behind the goals with the netting and all the fireworks and everything. It was unbelievable. And I think Shevchenko scored, and so did Leonardo, I think, as well. But there was a guy lying, steaming at the bottom of the steps as you go up into the stand, right? And he was like, you know, tanned Italian guy, quite sort of maybe, I don't know, 30s, 40s. And he had the Celtic People's away strip on, skin tight, right? Skin tight in the San Siro, and he had it on. And I don't know if he just like.
Is that where you got your top, JP? Is this where this story's going?
No. I went up to him. I had an AC Milan strip on. I went up to him on the phone, and I was like, I am Celtic supporter. I am from Glasgow, and he was just like, got absolutely at the game. And I've never forgotten that day. Like, of all the strips to be wearing, he was wearing that strip. It was so surreal, and I wish I'd taken a picture of him. I didn't.
You know how entrenched I became in the Celtic jerseys, obviously doing the research and all that stuff. The People's Fords was obviously on the jerseys for one season, and the gentleman who ran and runs that company is Brian Gilder, a big Celtic fan, and he sponsored the billboards for years and years. You used to see it, you know, in the late 80s, early 90s. And it was Terry Cassidy that gave him the opportunity to sponsor the club for one season. And he tells these wee strange stories, JP, even to this day, where one of the jerseys will pop up somewhere if they're on holiday. And it really just fills them with absolute pride that his company name that he's built up was on the Celtic jersey. But interestingly enough, I remember the big hoo-ha being, the fact that we allowed red, white and blue on the front of the hoops or any Celtic jersey. And then some people pointed out, the first Celtic jersey had red in it because it was in the crest. But it was absolutely unforgivable to allow red, white and blue on the jersey. And I did ask Brian about that. And he said that it was Terry Cassidy. He didn't care. Because Ford would have had an issue with their logo appearing anywhere if it was maybe black, silver, green, for example. They wouldn't have allowed us to use that on the jersey. So Cassidy just allowed them to use it red, white and blue. Wasn't interested. So it just shows you the disconnect that we had back then, JP, harking back to the 1990s. That disconnect that the club had with the fans, it just didn't understand that would be an issue. AC Milan, the great names that you mentioned Shevchenko there. His name's popped up in relation to the Celtic manager's job, hasn't it?
I mean, I don't know what his managerial history record is, but if Andrei Shevchenko became the Celtic manager, wow, that would be something else. It'd be football full circle, That's 20 years ago I was at that, 21 years ago I was at that game in the San Siro. And they had to win to get their Champions League spot, and they won 4-1. So the place was going bananas. It was class. It was only £7 for a ticket. I got a ticket outside the ground for £7.
Brilliant. I mean, Shevchenko, bizarrely enough, I might have told this story, a pal of mine who I came up through primary school with actually played against them. Bizarrely enough, because he played with Barrytown, my mate. He was with Swindon. He went to Barrytown on loan, and they drew Dynamo Kiev in Europe because it was a European Cup, Winners' Cup back then, and it was 9-0 in Kiev. 9-0 in Kiev, and up front for Kiev that night was Rebrov and Shevchenko.
That was the two up front together, Rebrov and Shevchenko. Championship manager, glory days.
Both managers now. Both managers. Rebrov put us out of Europe this season, did he not? Was he the manager of Ferencváros?
He was.
Let's not talk about this. Moving swiftly on. So let's go back to this Glasgow Derby then. I mean, I don't think there will ever be a moment in the future where anyone can say football and politics doesn't mix, because it quite clearly does. And political figures are coming in with their size 9s to influence the Scottish game. Once again, it seems to be that it's happened time and time again. And, the measures that they are possibly talking about is they are going to be communicating with Celtic and Rangers about the Glasgow Derby, and they require assurances from the clubs. So I guess that goes back, Declan, to the fact that, the police need to deal with this. I mean, I'm not the type of person, JP, that's going to go to Celtic Park on that particular day for any reason, to be honest with you, but there may well be people who will turn up from both sides. I don't know what the planning is, but with regards to that, obviously, the club could put out a message, the club could put out a statement, but I don't really think we've got much in the way of any kind of influence over what people decide to do on the day. It's a difficult one. If it is postponed, though, this is a big question, Declan. What happens? I mean, if it is postponed, what happens?
Well, there's too many big events going to be coming up in the following months, Paul. We've got this Glasgow Derby, there's going to be another one at Ibrox Park, there's going to be a Scottish Cup final, whoever is in that. So it's 3 big events. As well as that, you're going to have the team on the other side of the city lifting the league championship. So it's 4 big events. So if the police can't do their job in this instance, it must be a case that all 4 of them get put off, because, we're at a critical juncture here with COVID. If public health is the main priority, then it just can't proceed. So if the police can't do their job, I think it's a case of game's a bogey, because why should this be called off and other ones know it? So I don't really see where we move from here, and what's going to do. Is there going to be any point in calling it off, because it's just going to be repeated? They're thinking it's maybe just going to calm down a bit. When is that going to be put into fiction or whatever? It just seems like a total mess.
Yeah, it does. And don't you think, JP, that Celtic would feel hard done by? Because we're being implicated in someone else's misdemeanours.
Oh yeah, absolutely. We didn't. I know that the protest, however many people were there, I don't know if it was a couple hundred. I still don't know to this day how many people were outside after the Ross County game. Maybe do either of you two know, like roughly how many were there?
Well, it wasn't thousands and thousands, was
certainly
it?
not the numbers like we saw at the weekend.
No,
Certainly not.
no, it wasn't. It was a microcosm of our support when you take into account the bigger picture and the bigger amount of our support that are there. So, yeah, that incident I don't think really correlates with what we saw at the weekend. What you saw at the weekend was pent up excitement. They wanted somewhere to go. They had nowhere to go, and they just on autopilot just went to a place that somebody had obviously said, right, we're all meeting in George Square, and they just went there. But it ended up, to me, it didn't look like a celebration. It just looked like people sort of just being in a place for the sake of it. There was nothing really that could happen. There was no live music. There was no music at all. It was just like a sort of gathering, and then everybody just went away, and the place was an absolute wreck as a result. If this game is to go ahead, I think there needs to be strong statements from both clubs to discourage people from going. I think the fans have got a big part to play as well to sort of push down, this idea that going there is a good idea, because it's absolutely not. People got to remember what the hell is going on here. We can't go and meet up with our friends. We can't go and see our families. So why should it be okay to congregate at a football match at which you can't even get into the ground? It just seems completely bizarre. I mean, there's nothing to defend here. We're not in Braveheart or anything like that. Do you know what I mean? It's a football match that's going on inside the ground. Yes, it's against the two teams at the top of the league. Yes, it's against the team that's won the league. But we'll get back in the stadium at some point, and that's when we can release whatever we want to release. But this idea of going to the ground, for me, it just needs to be absolutely hit in the head, because it's a non-starter for me.
No, I totally agree with that, JP. You're talking about getting back into the grounds. That leads me on to the next subject. I'll come to yourself first, Declan, around the statement that was released by the Celtic Trust, who were suggesting that they might launch a share issue for season ticket refunds, which will ensure ordinary fans have a greater say in the running of the club. And I kind of pointed out yesterday that there is no refund this season. The virtual season ticket, there is no refund. So it certainly can't be done in conjunction with a refund. It may, do you think, be worked into this added value? Do you think that is a potential? And if so, do you think it would be a good move in relation to the club getting more control? And obviously various clubs all around Europe have got fan representatives on the board. Is that something that you think will happen in the not too distant future for Celtic? Is this the way to go about it?
I think it's good that the other clubs in Europe and stuff have got fans on the board. I think it's an important part to have as a modern day football club, and I would like to see it. Whether this share issue is going to be the right way to do that, I don't know. I've not really read too much into it. But it's certainly, it's a Celtic Trust coming up with an idea and their support having a look at it. That's productive. You need to be productive. Again, no, if you look at a guy like Tom Allison on Celtic's board, who owns, I think, something in the region of 3% of the club, obviously having another share issue would dilute his percentage. Same goes for Dermot Desmond. The other guys at the top up there, your John Keanes, Chris Trainers, etc. So I don't think the guys on the board would be too keen on it. But, for some fans who would maybe like to have that wee bit of ownership of the club, it's certainly a good idea. But again, it's just a case of seeing how it proceeds. But as I say, I don't think the guys at the very top of Celtic's board would be too pleased to see that happen, because it would ultimately dilute their holding, which isn't a bad thing from our perspective, but from theirs, don't think they would be too keen on it.
Yeah, I mean, I read the statement, JP, around, the statement was made by the chairman of the Trust, David Lowe, who's been on ACSOM quite a few times, talking back to the original vision that Fergus McCann had for the club when he took over, in relation to exactly what Declan's saying there. No real individual would have control of the club over the period of time since Fergus McCann left. Gradually, that is exactly what's happened, where we do have people who are controlling the club. Do you see a time where that might change? I mean, could it be that during the pandemic and the financial crisis that is going to continue for some time, after we get back to some kind of normality. Do you see a club like Celtic, where we always pride ourselves on having this special fan base, and the club itself calls itself a club like no other, although that might be getting changed to one club since 1888. I don't know if that's going to be the new kind of tagline. Do you think it would make sense? I mean, I think it would be fantastic for the fans to have representation on the board.
Yeah, it would be, undoubtedly. Yeah, I think that is what happens at St. Pauli. I'm pretty sure in that documentary, I'm sure that they were talking about fan representation and being involved in decision making and things like that. I'm not saying we go in and our voice is the only voice, but to have a voice in that arena would be good. And with regards to whether the slogan's going to change, I think Adidas will be watching and taking notes on that, because they could probably seize upon quite a good opportunity there for merch. But that's if people are going to buy the merch, that is, of course, but that's another story. But with regards to what they do with my money, say obviously I paid £600 this season for a season ticket, of which I'm not going to see one game. And whatever they decide to do, I would rather that they try to keep that money and then use it to discount me going forward. I'm not expecting to get £300 back in my account. I would rather that it was used over a period of time where it was kind of almost paid back to me over a period of time, in whatever manner they choose to do. I don't know. They must be coming up with something, because they can't just finish the season and go, right, cheers, thanks for that £600, everybody. Now moving on. It's like that can't be the case, because there's no way you can say we've paid £600 and we've had value for money as a customer, first and foremost, before you talk about a supporter.
I think the club would need to agree with that, JP. I mean, there's no way they could put an argument up to say that you've had the value. So, the added value, it'll be interesting to see how they try and build that and how they market it to the fan base. And that does take us to that point. Again, Declan, we were talking about, the time is coming to a point where we will be asked again to renew season tickets for next season. Nobody knows exactly when we will be back in a football ground, and you would envisage that at some point next season that will happen, Declan. However, I've heard a lot of people touching on a point that JP mentioned there and brought up about merch sales, about season ticket sales, keeping money back from the club. I don't think that is the way to go. I think that since these comments were made, big changes have happened. They've not all happened at once. I don't think that's possible. Are we moving further away from that kind of attitude? I'm not saying everybody had that attitude in relation to not investing their money directly in the club, because, that would just damage the club, would it not?
Yeah, it would damage the club, Paul. I wasn't one of the people that at Christmas wouldn't go and shop in the Celtic shop, because inevitably, you buy stuff for whoever. And I think, again, if Celtic appoint the right candidate in the manager's role, people will buy into it. They'll buy their season ticket. They'll buy the new Adidas top or whatever. But certainly what the previous point we were talking about, there's no way we can still move forward with everybody being happy, because the club needs to move forward in a positive manner. The only way that's going to work is if the fans are behind it. But at the same time, the club needs to be engaging and treating fans properly. And I think that's what everybody just really wants, is to be treated properly. Whereas this season we've not been treated properly. And that's evident to see from anybody who's got a season ticket, who's been accessing a stream that at times isn't reliable. And as JP says, £600, they're going to need to look at what the whole role of added value is, which I think is something that John Paul Taylor's been looking at for a long time now, and the club's not acted on. So there's certainly, I think it's there. They know that it's on the table, but they're going to need to act on it, because people, you can't expect people to next season to fork out that kind of money again and not be getting to a game. I hope we're back in the stadiums, but you don't know the situation, so you really need to have planning in place for that.
When we do go back, I think will be managed by a different managerial team. JP, it's still a massive talking point. Of course it is. I've seen all the names that have been thrown into the hat. Steve Martin, radical change needed. Top manager required to get bums on seats and the players a kick up the backside. And I think we've probably spoken about all the different possibilities, JP, on a Celtic State of Mind in relation to the managerial candidates. Not every individual, but the directions, the different directions that the club could take. You know, they could stay with what they have. They could go and get a manager of a particular level, and I think Kevin Graham spoke about, Jack Ross, for example, or they could go for this top manager that Steve Martin's talking about, or indeed they could go for the director of football, stroke head coach, Harkin Maresca, which we spoke about a couple of weeks ago, JP. There's obviously developments constantly happening in the world of management. Read with interest a tweet that went out this morning from the Sky Sports reporter who, when Anthony Joseph tweets, you'd certainly take notice of it. I think very credible source talking about Ralph Rangnick, who might be interested in the soon-to-be available Germany job, and that's a big concern for me, is that the crop of any shortlist, JP, are going to be romanced very, very soon by various nations or clubs down south or elsewhere who are acting swiftly and getting their man in. Is that a big concern for you? Do you think we've already got something in the background? I mean, I think some people were surprised at the announcement when Peter Lawlor stepped down, or announced that he was going to. Is it something that is getting to that concerning stage for you, JP, or do you believe the club have got this under control and all will come to fruition come the summer?
Well, first of all, Steve Martin, great in every film he made, I might add, and continues to make, hopefully. But yeah, I think with regards to that statement the other day, what was it? There was one, I think it was 20 Minute Tim's, their title of one of their recent posts was "You Better Not Stumble," and that goes along with, if you're going to put out a tweet like that galvanizes the support and really is a kind of a fist in the air, so to speak, then you better have something to back it up, because you can't come to the party with alcohol-free beer. It's got to be something stronger than that. So that's Kevin Graham. Thank you. That was a total Kevin Graham analogy there, without the accent. But I think they've surely got to be sitting on something, And I have swayed between, do I want this big name manager, with the status and the whole, would he fill a stand if we were to unveil him and all of that? I've flirted with that idea, but I do keep going back to, a progressive coach from a top club. And if it were to be Enzo Maresca, he's coming from Manchester City. He's not coming from, Bradford City. No disrespect to Bradford City. Got a lot of time for them. My dad supported them. But I was just using it as a comparison. If you're going for a guy from a club of that size, there is something about that guy. It might not fill a stand if he's unveiled. I don't particularly care about that, because look where that ultimately got us a couple of years later. The guy ran out the back door and didn't tell anybody. So, I want somebody to come in, have an idea what they're going to do, implement their strategy across the whole club, and go about, getting us winning football games again in the park.
See, it's an interesting one because you're absolutely right. It's very much a short-term enjoyment when you get that unveiling, JP. You get the box office manager and the box office smile from Brendan Rodgers, but you just know that it's a short-term thing. It's going to be 2.5 to 3 years until someone from down south comes calling. Declan McConville, where are you in relation to the approach that Celtic take in terms of the managerial setup?
I think initially, Paul, when myself, you and Tony Haggerty were on the morning Neil Lennon resigned, I was of the position it had to be, an elite manager. But the more I've kind of thought about it, in terms of Celtic's budget, the way we need to go forward, we've read Ian Banker's statement on looking at European football in the next, not too long future. I kind of in the same camp as JP in terms of it needs to be a manager who will develop players, and that might not be that box office that's going to be there for a while, because we can't just have a stopgap. Celtic need to progress, and I don't think if you maybe brought in a guy like Eddie Howe, who would be great, that he's going to be there for a very long time. He'll be here 2-3 years and he'll be back out the door. So I'm kind of more in the camp just now of bringing somebody who can develop players, that can work the market well, and can work within, not a small budget, but a budget that isn't going to be the type that Brendan Rodgers was certainly offered first time around.
You know, I'm going to bring this up because I've seen this all over social media. Number one in your avatar, is that how many titles you've won, Grim? Are you saying that Celtic fans would have not gone to Geo Square to celebrate 10 in a row? Let's just deal with the facts. Let's deal with what's happened. Let's not say, aye, but, you know, if you had done this, this would have happened. You know, this is what I'm talking about. Celtic cannot be implicated in the actions and misdemeanours of another fan base, and that's exactly what's happening at this moment in time in relation to, you know, going right back to that same old tact of you're basically as bad as each other. JP, we have not contributed to the scenes over the weekend, other than we weren't very good this season, allowing that club to win the league. You know, so I'm just not buying that. It doesn't stand up to scrutiny in any way, shape or form. Now, by the way, I'm not just here to give Lenny a bashing, but he was being criticised this week by Sheffield Wednesday. It seems like everybody's having a dig at Neil Lennon, and that was over the transfer of Liam Shaw, which has eventually been confirmed. What was your thoughts on that, JP? Basically, Sheffield Wednesday are even considering talking to their legal team over this.
Well, it's good to know that Neil Lennon was at least involved in the transfer activity, rather than it being Peter Lawlor or Nicky Hammond and Lennon finding out about it when the guy turned up at training or something like that. But you know, I find it bizarre that it's not really like Celtic to conduct their transfer business like that, in terms of, you know, I think it would all be above board. I don't recall ever really seeing any other clubs coming out and having a pop at us for the way that we've handled things, or having, you know, they didn't really have a pop at the player, because how could they? He's you know, he's still a serving player. It would, you know, damage their own footballing ambitions if they were to start calling out a player that they've still got in their books. But yeah, it seemed a bit strange. I've certainly not in recent memory remember anything like that. No doubt somebody in the comments will come up and be like, oh, but what about this, what about that? But yeah, it's a bit of a strange one. Just on that guy's point about would Celtic fans have gone to celebrate 10 in a row, I think we won a historic 9 in a row for the second time, you know, and there was no scenes like that. You know, there was maybe a couple of people with flags on a walkway here and there, but there was no mass congregation. There was no flouting of the rules, and you know, that was a big deal. That was a big deal last year, and it was completely and utterly ruined for me by that. You know, I took enjoyment from it, but sitting here on my own with a bottle of champagne is not where I wanted to celebrate. If I ever saw Celtic winning 9 in a row, which in the 90s was an absolute pipe dream, I certainly would rather not have been sitting alone in my flat. But I did it because I obeyed the rules and I have a brain in my head. But apparently quite a lot of people don't have that. So
I know what Declan was doing, because I zoomed him into an ACSOM special and he was sitting in his bedroom drinking beer on his own. But no, it's a great point. And even if you just go back to December, JP, back to December, you know, quadruple treble, and how did we conduct ourselves at that point? It really is. It is time. You know, people will say it's long overdue, but it is certainly an opportunity, I would suggest, for Celtic to pin their colours to the mast, as it were, in relation to that. And we do stand alone. We stand alone. We're not part of this mythical old firm alliance that people, you know, just use to hit you over the back of the head with every time somebody else misbehaves. So, no, I'm not buying it, and I don't think Celtic fans should ever buy into that or accept it, and it needs to be called out time and time again. We've had a dreadful season. You know, there's been so much wrong with this season. We've criticised the clubs and changes are being made, but it's still a club that we're going to support next season and seasons beyond that, Declan. I was talking a few weeks ago, it'll be my wee man's first season ticket, regardless of what happens next season. And, you know, then you're passing that baton on and you move on again to another generation. And that's the way that this club conducts itself, not the way that any other club conducts themselves. So JP, I take that on board, and I would even bring it right back up to December. You know, how did we celebrate December? I was sitting here when we won a quadruple treble, and you know, and then I went home. And you know, if someone wants to show me scenes similar to that happened in December, you know, bring it on, because I can't remember it. So I don't know how Celtic could be criticised or punished for someone else's misbehaviour. Let's have a wee chat about that game before we go, though, Declan, because obviously, you know, we watched the Dundee United game, And as I said earlier on, you're watching it, it was same old. A lot of the issues that we've seen on the park all season re-emerged. I mean, should we have expected any more? It's the same coaching staff, it's the same players. We've spoken about culture, we've spoken about this malaise in amongst the Celtic squad. It would have taken something special for that to have changed overnight or within a couple of weeks. There are concerns about the fitness. The tempo just drops at 65th minute of the game. We've seen all that. The bizarre substitutions. We've seen all this all season. But there was this realisation at some point, maybe even at half-time, this isn't going to happen. We're going to lose the league today. And it was when I jumped in the motor on the Monday where I'm thinking this is the first time in a decade I'm going to my work and Celtic are not the league champions. Absolutely the end of an era. Probably came a wee bit sooner than we expected. But when you're looking ahead to the next game against Rangers, Declan, what are you expecting? Are you expecting big changes? I mean, the league is gone. Would you expect us to bring in some of the fringe players? Would you expect something that I've suggested, that we start playing Barkas and Ajeti? Let's get a look at these guys. Are they going to be part of the rebuild? Are they going to be at Celtic Park next season? The only way that you can answer that question is by giving them half a dozen games in a row, giving them from now to the end of the season. How do you see John Kennedy approaching the game against Rangers?
In terms of what John Kennedy does, I don't think there'll be many changes. I mean, a game that we really needed to show up for pride at Tannadice. 3 strikers on the bench, and I know Mohamed El Anoussi is, I think, Celtic's second top goal scorer this season. I don't care. He shouldn't be playing as a striker with Hudson Edward when it's just not been a partnership that's flourished at all. The formation that we play is too narrow. You don't get a lot of width in that formation. I would rather see us change shape and kind of go back to something that we're more used to. I know this 4-4-2 diamond's been what we've used, but in terms of the Rangers game, I don't think there'll be many changes. Possibly Mohamed El Younousi dropped out the side to see one of the other strikers come in up top, but apart from that, I don't think there'll be much change to the side because it just seems to be what we're sticking with. And I'm on the side of you, Paul. I would rather players that are going to be there next season or I've still possibly got a future at the club get a chance just now because it's done. So why not? There should be no loyalty to guys that want out the door. If we're going to go in the summer, I don't want them playing just now. Just don't play them. How good they are unless we really need to play them. If you take the left back position just now, I know we need to play Diego Laxalt, but from now until the end of the season, if Craig Taylor becomes fit again, it should be him because it's going to be the guy we go forward with.
What about yourself, talking about Diego Laxalt, one of a few players who have played for both Celtic and AC Milan? Who else has done that? Massimo Donati? Played with AC Milan. I wasn't going to mention him, but that jersey over your shoulder is relevant to that because I see that and I think Di Canio. What about yourself, JP? I mean, you've got to try and extract as much positives as possible between now and the end of the season. Part of that would be, let's assess some of the players you would expect to be with us next season. We're forced to play Laxalt, he's only fit left back we've got at the club. We're forced to play John Joe Kenny because the only other right back we've got at the club is Anthony Ralston, and the business has been done. El Younousi came back in, Declan. If he's not going to be here next season, why play him? Exactly. I just wouldn't play him. That's my view on it. I would be playing guys like Barkas and Ajeti, try to build their confidence up, actually really assess them in a game situation. Have a look at Sorrow. He's going to be playing more games next season than Scott Brown, no matter what happens. So play him. Because, there is a professional pride at stake, JP, but it's not as though we're throwing in the kids here. These are guys that have got a lot of experience.
Yeah, I would be hesitant about Sorrow in that game, just purely because how he was in the previous game, and he has a propensity, if that's a word, to be a bit over enthusiastic in his tackles, and nothing nasty or malicious, but he just doesn't time them well, and I wouldn't want to see us on another red card tightrope in that game, because we get a red card in that game. That could be extremely damaging to us, I think, depending on how they're playing at the time. And I hope this clip isn't used as another thing to haunt me, because I remember I predicted Beaton's misdemeanour in that game at Ibrox almost exactly as well. I said if they were up in the game in terms of like their attacks and whatnot, and if we got them in the counter, you need to be wary of somebody like Beaton at centre half. So I think with regards to the players that are going to play in that game, I think, yeah, I'm with Declan, but if Chris Ayer has said that he doesn't want to be at Celtic anymore, I certainly wouldn't be dropping Chris Ayer for that game, because we can't do without somebody like him in that game, even if he does want to leave. He's not, like you've said many times, Paul. He's never put in a performance that's suggested that he's got his head half out the door, because he does give everything, and I'll repeatedly say it. He is a top player in waiting in terms of playing at a higher level, and will play at a higher level. And anybody that wants to comment, Celtic, Rangers, or otherwise, that says different, well, I disagree with you respectfully. But yeah, I think in regards to the team, I just think John Kennedy has to look everybody in the eye and be able to know that he's going to get 100% from everybody that plays in that game, whether it's Barkas or Bain, whether it's Ayeti or Griffiths. Everybody knows that they've let us down. They owe us a performance. They owe us big time. I know you could say, well, they don't owe us anything because we've not been there all season, and there's maybe an argument for that. And maybe those scenes after Ross County has damaged some of them in a way. Apparently they were all shocked that a few wee guys running after their bus, or chucking things or whatever, or picking up a fence. That doesn't reflect the whole Celtic support. Those wee guys there that night don't reflect me. I wasn't there, and they don't speak for me. So if any of them are watching this, play for people like us and not them.
Well, on that note, I'll bring up one final comment from Omar Alrida. Welcome to the show, Omar. Paul John Dykes. Don't you remember the two protests? Let's have a wee chat then, Omar. And this will be the final point of today about protest, because Celtic fans historically are very good at protesting. But I mean, we were so good at it in the 90s that we saved our club. That's how good we are at protesting. Now, the ones that JP mentioned, the knee-jerk reaction protest after the Ross County game, JP, where Harris fencing was thrown, etc., was rightly condemned by podcasts like this and elsewhere. But it has absolutely no bearing in the upcoming Celtic versus Rangers game. The big issue, the second protest I think that you're talking about, Omar, was the COVID-friendly organised protest by the Celtic Trust, where everybody that gathered there, as I say, followed COVID protocols. So, there's absolutely no argument that anything was done on that particular day that would affect any football match. But rioting in the streets and breaking furniture and at the public's cost, again, at the taxpayers' cost, on the eve, if you like, of a Celtic Rangers game, is slightly different. So yeah, I do remember the protest you're referring to, but I go even further back to some other protests that Celtic fans did do successfully, because, as I say, JP, you'll remember them, we were very good at protesting when we saved our club back in the 1990s. I don't think there will be an issue in relation to Celtic supporters on that given day. We've played Rangers since our protest against Ross County, and as far as I'm aware, no Celtic fans turned up at Ibrox. So, I don't expect any of our fans to turn up at Celtic Park. But between now and that game, I'm sure there'll be loads of other developments. Thanks everybody for your comments on A Celtic State of Mind. Thank you to JP and Declan McConville for joining us once again on the ACSOM Bulletin.